The Dimera system was remote, its sun a cold, pale orb casting long shadows across the jagged asteroids that surrounded it. In its orbit, the remnants of the Republic Space Force assembled, a ghost fleet of battered ships, patched with whatever scrap could be scavenged in the aftermath of their defeat at Haven Prime. Each vessel bore the scars of battles lost, their hulls streaked with dark gashes and hastily repaired weapon mounts. But among the worn metal and flickering lights, there was resolve. Admiral Carrick had survived Haven Prime, barely escaping with a fragment of the fleet and a dwindling hope. Now he stood on the bridge of the Resolute Dawn, a cruiser that once commanded respect in better days. Its bridge was dim, lit by the glow of cracked consoles, and the crew moved with silent efficiency, their eyes reflecting a determination born from the shared knowledge that this was their last stand. Carrick looked out over the holographic projection of the fleet gathered before him. Frigates with shattered hulls held together by prayers and steel, corvettes bristling with mismatched weaponry, and a handful of larger ships whose shields flickered uncertainly under the strain of power they could barely support. The remnants of 3 scattered task forces now made up the Republic's final hope. His gaze shifted to the officers before him. Commander Alaric Terros, a man with one arm replaced by a rudimentary cybernetic after losing it to a technocracy boarding party, nodded grimly. Captain Soraya Vale, head of intelligence, stood tall despite the bandages peeking out from beneath her uniform, wounds earned in the desperate escape weeks earlier. At her side, Dr. Micah Wren, the scientist who had been rescued from a technocracy research station, studied the data projected on the table. His worn face was still haunted by the horrors he'd witnessed, but his mind, sharp as ever, held the key to their plan. Carrick cleared his throat, breaking the silence. We all know why we're here. This is not just a battle. It's our final move against an enemy that has hunted us, crushed us, and turned our own against us. He paused, eyes meeting each member of his command team. But we have an edge now. Dr. Wren looked up from his terminal, his voice low but urgent. The virus is ready. It's designed to exploit the very backbone of technocracy technology. If we can infect their mainframe, it will spread through their entire network, causing their implants to fail, their systems to shut down. Their very reliance on technology will become their undoing. Alaric grunted, his artificial fingers flexing as he considered the plan. And who's going to deliver this little gift? Carrick turned toward the viewport, where a small, stealth-capable ship hung in the distance, shrouded in shadows. Zara Kai, he said, a hint of hope returning to his voice. She's the only one who's managed to get in and out of a technocracy facility alive. She and her crew will be our infiltration team. Aboard Spectre's Veil, Zara Kai listened to Carrick's speech through the comms. Her jaw was set, eyes narrowed as she studied the station plans projected in front of her. The Technocracy Science Station was massive, orbiting a barren moon and surrounded by a defensive fleet that would soon be drawn away by Carrick's desperate gambit. Ran Alcott, Spectre's Veil's ace pilot, leaned against the console beside her, his usual smirk absent. This is it, Zara. If we fail, there won't be anyone left to pick up the pieces. I know, Zara said, her voice tight with purpose. She glanced at her crew. Ran Alcott, always a steady hand under pressure. Ilya, their communications and code-breaking expert, and Thorne, their engineer, who had managed to keep the stealth systems running on sheer ingenuity. We won't fail, she added, looking back at the station's plans. We've got one chance to end this nightmare, and I don't intend to waste it. The comm crackled as Admiral Carrick's final words came through. Prepare for battle. This is where we take back what they stole from us. This is where we remind the technocracy that hope is not so easily extinguished. As the last echoes faded, the fleet began to move, engines rumbling to life and weapons charging for the fight of their lives. In the silence that followed, Zara Kai and her team made their final checks, knowing that once they launched, there would be no turning back. The cold emptiness of space stretched before Zara Kai as Spectre's Veil slipped silently through the shadows of the Dimera system. The stealth ship was barely a whisper against the backdrop of stars, its cloaking systems humming with the familiar low buzz that had kept it hidden for years. Zara's hands rested lightly on the controls, her expression unreadable as she navigated the ship into the periphery of the Technocracy Science Station's orbit. Her crew moved quietly around her, finalizing preparations for the most dangerous mission they had ever undertaken. Ren Olcott, the ace pilot who had flown countless missions under impossible odds, stood behind her at the comms station. His voice was a mix of apprehension and determination. "They'll have patrols scanning the area. We can't slip past their detection grid without triggering alarms." "We won't have to," Zara replied, her tone sharp. "The fleet's engaging them right now. Carrick's already given us our window. We just have to make sure we don't get noticed before we're in." She glanced over at Ilya, their communications expert, who was crouched over the encrypted console, fingers dancing across the interface. "I've got the codes," Ilya said, her voice calm but laced with tension. "We can access their comms when we get close, and I'll make sure they're distracted. No one will know we're in the airlocks until it's too late." Thorne, their engineer, was in the back, his hands busy with one of the ship's makeshift power converters. His eyes flicked up from his work, and he gave Zara a grim nod. "Everything's patched in. The virus is ready to go, but if anything goes wrong, you'll be on your own. There's no way to get out if you trigger the alarm." Zara felt the weight of his words settle over her, but she didn't let it show. They'd come this far, and there was no turning back. If this mission failed, the Republic was finished. Haven Prime's fall had proven that. The Technocracy was unstoppable. But if they succeeded, if she could get that virus into their mainframe, the Technocracy would begin to unravel. Their reliance on their implants, their unyielding faith in technology, would be their downfall. "Ready," Zara said quietly, meeting the eyes of her team one by one. They didn't need to speak further. They all knew what was at stake. Spectre's veil passed into the outer reaches of the science station's perimeter, shrouded in near-total silence. Zara's heart raced, though her face remained impassive. The massive space station loomed ahead, a metallic monolith surrounded by gleaming defense turrets and sleek patrol ships. The Technocracy's obsession with order and control was evident in every line, every surface. It was a place of cold logic, of precision. "Approaching airlocks," Ilya said, her voice cutting through the tension. "I'm patching into their internal systems now. They're too busy with the fleet's movements to notice us." Zara's breath caught slightly as the ship glided closer. They could be detected at any moment. Every step of this operation was fraught with danger, but they had no choice. The fleet's sacrifice would be in vain if they couldn't pull this off. She glanced down at the virus data, safely stored within the secure module Thorne had prepared. Seconds felt like hours. The airlock loomed closer, and then Spectre's veil slid into position, its entry nearly flawless. Ilya's fingers flew over the terminal, sending a false command that cycled the lock open without triggering an alarm. "All systems green," Ilya announced. "The coast is clear." Zara turned to her crew, her voice low but firm. "Let's move. Stick to the plan. In and out." With that, they moved quickly into the docking bay, Zara leading the way with a determined stride. The station was a labyrinth of corridors and sealed doors, each layer of security more advanced than the last. The crew moved with practiced precision, their steps silent, their movements calculated. Every shadow could be hiding a sensor or a guard, but they were prepared. Zara activated her comms discreetly. "Ren, stay on standby. We'll need a quick exit." Ren's voice crackled back in her ear. "Understood. I'll be waiting for you." They navigated the tight passages, avoiding patrols and carefully disabling surveillance as they went. Ilya used her skills to hack into the station's security systems, looping cameras and rerouting sentry drones to other sections of the station. It was a delicate dance of timing and precision, but after years of covert operations, Zara knew exactly how to move through enemy territory. "Almost there," Ilya murmured, her fingers tapping rapidly at her terminal. "The mainframe is just a few levels down. We're running out of time. The Technocracy fleet will be reorienting soon." Zara's heart pounded in her chest as they approached the access elevator. This was it, the heart of the technocracy's operations. They had the virus, and now they just needed to inject it into their core systems. One slip-up, and the whole station would be on high alert. But as they entered the elevator, a sudden, sharp crackling sound echoed in their earpieces. Zara, Ren's voice came through, strained with urgency. The technocracy's tracking systems just activated. They've noticed something's off. They're starting to lock down the station. Zara's eyes narrowed. No turning back now. We need to move faster. They exited the elevator with only moments to spare. Zara's pulse quickened as she reached the mainframe room, her mind already calculating the best way to deploy the virus. Her fingers danced across the console, overriding access protocols, while Ilya kept watch for any incoming threats. But just as Zara was about to deploy the virus, the doors to the room slid open with a sharp hiss, and Zara froze. A squad of technocracy guards stepped inside, their blank eyes scanning the room. Their implants glowed with an eerie light, and their movements were swift, fluid, terrifying. The ambush had begun. The technocracy guards entered the room, their footsteps echoing sharply in the sterile silence. Zara froze, her fingers hovering over the console, barely holding her breath as she calculated her options. The mission had already gone too far. They were too close to the virus upload to fail now. The guards' cold, mechanical movements betrayed their synthetic origins, each step deliberate, their neural enhancements making them eerily precise. Zara's heart pounded as the doors slid shut behind them, trapping her and her crew in the room. There was no time to run. They would die here if necessary, but they would not die in vain. "Stay calm," Zara whispered, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. "Ilya, Thorn, buy us time to finish the upload." Ilya, who had been poised to engage their communications network, flicked a switch on her wrist comms and took a step forward. "I'll lock the doors, create a perimeter breach on the far side. It'll slow them down." Thorn, already standing by the emergency supply crate, quickly set up an improvised barricade with whatever he could find. "Just make sure this works. We're out of time." Zara gave them a sharp nod and turned back to the terminal. The virus was almost there. The data was beginning to upload, and soon the technocracy's iron grip over its people, its implants, and its systems would begin to falter. But there were only moments left before the technocracy guards overwhelmed them. Without warning, the lead guard, his blank stare unblinking, raised his weapon toward them. "Halt," he ordered in a flat, modulated voice. "You are unauthorized. Surrender now." Zara's pulse surged. "We don't have time for this," she muttered, unsheathing her blade. "Prepare yourselves." As if on cue, Ilya's hand swept out, throwing a flashbang grenade toward the farthest guard. The blinding light and deafening noise incapacitated him for a moment, but it was only a temporary reprieve. The rest of the squad moved like clockwork, eyes focused, implants processing the situation, calculating their next move. "Thorn, take the left flank," Zara shouted as the first shot rang out. She dove behind the console, hearing the crack of laser fire cutting through the air. One of the technocracy soldiers fell back with a shriek, blood splattering across the pristine white walls of the mainframe room. But the victory was short-lived. As Thorn ducked for cover, his face set in grim determination, a technocracy soldier appeared from the corner, his rifle aimed directly at Zara. She reacted instinctively, throwing herself to the side and firing her sidearm in one smooth motion. The shot hit the guard square in the chest, but he didn't fall. Instead, he staggered, his augmented muscles working overtime to stay on his feet. "You won't stop us," Zara shouted through gritted teeth. The guards moved swiftly, their augmented bodies pushing them into action, and they were closing in. The hum of their combat-enhanced reflexes was an ever-present reminder of the imbalance between them and the tired, battle-worn Republic team. Ilya was the first to fall, taking a direct hit from a heavy-pulse rifle. The shot sent her sprawling against the far wall, her eyes wide with shock before her body went still. "No!" Thorn yelled, throwing himself toward her. But as he reached her side, another soldier appeared from behind a pillar, his weapon trained on him. Thorn had no time to react. The shot rang out, and Thorn collapsed to the ground in a heap, his body twitching as the last of his life left him. Zara's chest constricted, her breath catching in her throat, but there was no time to mourn. She had to finish the mission. For them. For everyone. The virus was nearly in the system. With one last burst of energy, Zara pushed herself forward. She wasn't done yet. Her eyes locked on the terminal as she typed in the final sequence, initiating the virus deployment with a breathless final command. The data streamed from the console, and the virus began to propagate, sending a silent, invisible wave through the station's systems. The technocracy's neural interfaces would soon begin to falter, the implants that controlled the soldiers' every thought and movement starting to malfunction. But the victory felt hollow. Zara was alone now. She turned to face the remaining technocracy guards, all of them closing in, their eyes unblinking, their weapons raised. But just as they moved to capture her, the station's lights flickered violently, a tremor passing through the walls. Zara, Ren's voice crackled through her comms, breathless. We've got incoming. The fleet's got the station surrounded. It's your only chance to get out of there. Come on. Zara paused. The thought of escaping felt almost sacrilegious after all the lives already lost. But this wasn't about her. It was about ending this war no matter the cost. She didn't have a choice. As she turned to make her way back to the airlock, she fired a last few shots, taking down the final guard blocking her exit. The airlock doors opened, and she sprinted for Spectre's Veil, her heart heavy with grief and triumph all at once. Behind her, the station was beginning to fail. Its sleek, hyper-advanced systems, so beloved by the technocracy, were slowly being corrupted. Implants were shutting down, communication systems flickering into chaos. The technocracy would feel the consequences soon enough. But for Zara it was over. She watched Spectre's Veil retract into the depths of space, the station already a dying, malfunctioning husk behind her. She didn't look back. The Republic's last hope had been delivered. The universe was quieter now. The once thriving, efficient empire of the technocracy was on the brink of collapse. The virus Zara Kai had deployed had spread like wildfire through their networks, taking down systems one by one, destabilizing the very foundation of their control. Their precious implants, once the backbone of their power, had begun to fail on a massive scale, rendering thousands of their super soldiers and leaders incapacitated or dead. But the victory came at a cost. Zara sat alone in the darkened cockpit of Spectre's Veil, her hands gripping the cold metal of the controls. Her eyes stared out into the vast emptiness of space, but her mind was far from the quiet stars. Ilya was gone. Thorn was gone. Ren Alcott, the ace pilot, had managed to escape with Zara, but his face was drawn and somber. The crew she had known, her family, was reduced to memories now, echoes of the sacrifices they'd made for this fleeting chance at victory. And as much as she tried to block out the weight of those losses, she couldn't help but feel the sharp sting of their absence. The Republic's fleet had retreated after the virus had taken hold, decimated by the technocracy's counterattack, but the last remnants of their forces had lived to fight another day. Zara's mission had bought them that time. The virus had crippled the technocracy's ability to coordinate, leaving their fleets fractured and disoriented. But Zara knew it was only temporary. In the end, the Republic had survived. Barely. The stolen data and the AI virus had shifted the tide for now, but the war was far from over. The Republic had been weakened, its capital and main systems destroyed. The technocracy would regroup. They would recover. Zara and the remnants of the Republic's resistance now had a fragile hope, a small window to rebuild, to strike back. But Zara knew the technocracy would not stay down for long. They had been too powerful, too precise, and their lust for control ran too deep. We did what we could. Ren's voice broke through the silence of the cockpit, his hand resting on the navigation console beside her. He had managed to bring Spectre's Veil to a remote system far beyond technocracy sensors. It wasn't much, but it was enough for now. But this war, it's not over, is it? Zara's eyes didn't leave the stars. She could hear the soft hum of the ship's systems in the background, a lullaby of uncertainty. No, she replied quietly, her voice steady but filled with a resolve that could not be shaken. It's not over. Not by a long shot. The virus had done its job. The technocracy had been wounded, fractured, and for the first time in years, the Republic had a chance to regroup. But the fight was far from over. And Zara knew one thing above all else. The technocracy would not forget. They would come for the Republic. As the remnants of the fleet gathered in the remote system, preparing for the long road to rebuilding and survival, Zara felt the weight of her decisions press down on her. She had delivered the virus, but at what cost? The survivors of the crew, the lives lost, the friends who had died to bring this fragile hope. It was all too much for any one person to bear. But she had made a choice. They had made their stand. And for the first time in years, Zara allowed herself a fleeting, bittersweet thought of what might come next. If they could hold on long enough, if they could rebuild, they would rise again. And this time, when the technocracy came for them, they would be ready. Zara leaned back in her seat, closing her eyes for a brief moment, letting the weight of everything wash over her. There would be no easy path ahead, no quick victory. But the fire of rebellion still burned within her, as strong as ever. She would fight. They all would. The Republic's last hope had been delivered. And though it was uncertain, the dawn of a new rebellion had begun.